Hello everybody and welcome back to Operation Logistics, where I just had a thought at the end of the last episode, and that thought was that when we do our color hex default, one thing we could potentially do is set our minimum strength, and we'd want to do this probably, because, yeah, we'd probably want to do this somewhere around... I mean, we can do it here, that's fine, but we could probably do in here, the subhex manager, and we would set it to be, like, instead of just strength, it would be lerping between, say, and this would need to be mathf.lerp, between A and B, so A would be 0.25f, B would be 1.0f, and then it would be strength, like that. And we'd need an additional parenthesis here. So we would do this instead of strength. So that way, that wasn't what I wanted it to do. So that way it doesn't go completely dark the way it has been. And I think we have one too few parentheses or one too many. One too many. Yeah. Or one too few up here now, because I removed one that we had already gotten correct. And then in the hex manager, we can do the same thing with the strength here. And then we have one too many parentheses again there. There we go. So the other thing is that we were investigating why exactly the world hex, when we change our map mode, why this puts us out of range. And that's something we need to look at. So when we color our world hexes, we iterate through map IJ, and we do get world hex map mode inclusion. Maybe instead of doing an int3 hex here, we should be passing in int world hex index, like this. So instead of creating a new int3 here, we would do instead map ij.hex index. Okay. And then our position here would be equivalent to something along the lines of world hex index, and then our biome hex would be I. And then when we go in, is it this -1 that's giving us an issue with the biome hex map mode inclusion? I'm willing to bet it is. So let's look at that. So in the biome hex inclusion here, we are getting int3 hex. We don't actually use hex.building hex when we iterate through. Okay, that's interesting. Well, let's test our lerp code and see if we can figure out a little more of what's happening here with the world hex map modes. So let's go to our coverage map mode immediately. And yeah, that already looks a lot better. Of course, our water becomes fuchsia, but, or rather magenta, but that's to be expected, I guess. I guess one thing we could do is we could go into our world hex here and just tint it white. So set overlay color down here. This is in the world hex, actually. We need to be in the hex manager. So for hex classification.water, we would just set this to toColor.setOverlayColor color.white. Like that. That might do it, or we might need to tint it blue. I'm not sure which, but something along those lines should do the trick. Okay, that just tints them white, which isn't what we're going for, to be sure. So this, we would then just like, what if we set it to... Hang on. What if we set it to new color and set it to black, but also with no alpha? Would that cause it to not have a tint, or would that cause it to become invisible? One of those two things. Okay, it's just black. So neither is the answer. So realistically, we kind of want to have it be not an overlay color, right? Because when we create the water up here, we don't actually set the overlay color at all. So maybe when we clear it, we should just check to see when we clear the mesh colors, which is around here somewhere, right here. If map ij dot classification is not equal to hex classification dot water, then we set it to magenta. Otherwise, we just don't touch it. That should do the trick, right? I would think so. Yeah, that's more like it. Okay, so we'll come on in here, and we will go ahead and purchase this guy. Create root. And argument out of range exception. Excellent. So we can now see that we have an argument out of range exception starting here. These two actually colored correctly, but this one did not. So the question is, why did that not color correctly? Well, that's a good question. I don't know the answer quite yet. If I did, we'd be fixing it right now. So let's go in here and just look. So we've got our color hex default, get world hex map mode inclusion. Argument out of range exception once again in the sub hex manager at line 554. So it's messing up when it's attempting to get the building hex mode map, or the building hex map mode inclusion for the biome hex map mode inclusion, so that the world hex knows how bright it should be, right? So with that being the case, I mean, it's messing up right here in this line. So when we pass in our int3 hex, we're passing in a full int3, right? So yeah, we pass in our int3 position, which is hex.worldhex, hex.biomehex, which we pass in from the hex manager. So when we pass in our get biome hex map mode inclusion, our position is world hex index I. That's fine. And then when we go into the subhex manager, our building hex becomes I at that point because we iterate through again. And then we get building hex map mode inclusion with that position. And this isn't happening when we don't call this from here. So the only time we're getting an error from it is this. Biome hex manager dot get biome hex map mode inclusion position map mode. So are we just on the wrong track here? I'm not entirely sure. We might be. So it's happening within this line here. What could potentially be causing it? Well, it could also potentially be in this line theoretically. Potentially. It only output one argument out of range exception. Okay, well, let's hop in here. Go into coverage map mode. Root management, create root. Of course, we need to purchase the hex. There we go. Create the root. We go up there. Argument out of range exception. How many times? One time. If we go up over here, how many times? 2 times. Okay, So, with that being the case, do we have any more information here? Color world hexes, hex manager line 666. 666? Hang on. So we are here. Get world hex map mode inclusion. Right, we call it there. And then we are in the subhex manager line 55, or rather line 650. So then we're here with the get biome hex map mode inclusion. And then we go to subhex manager line 55, which is here, where we get our get building hex map mode inclusion. And then that takes us to subhex manager line 554, which is here, specifically here. And then that just takes us to the list. So yeah, that's doing pretty much exactly what I thought it was doing. It's just that every single time with a particular world hex, it goes out of range. But not all of the world hexes, right? Because the first couple of world hexes appear to work. We go into coverage map mode here. We'll go up in here, route management, create route. Actually, we're going to need to buy this land. Sure, whatever. It doesn't matter. We'll go over here, argument out of range exception. But then if you look at this, the ones in the first row seem to work. Beyond that, or rather the first column, seem to work. Beyond that, they don't. Can we replicate that? That's been the second or third time that I've noticed that. Okay, so we have one there. I'm going to regenerate this world, actually. See if this is any better. That is definitely not better. Okay. Now, one thing that we can do to speed this up, actually, now that I'm thinking about this, is when we call our color world hexes, we could do something along the lines of this. If map ij.classification equals hex classification.water, we can just continue. We don't need to color hex default at that point. We can just skip the whole thing, which will save us a lot of time. It also bears noting that we're currently essentially doing this twice. So there is that. We might want to think about how we're doing that. Okay, that's not a good one there. That's okay. We can work with that. So we'll go ahead and buy land here, create a route, and we're going to head up over this direction. Coverage map mode. Whoa, hang on. That worked. Okay, let's go to edit route mode and take this guy. Yeah, you can see it's still quite laggy. A lot of that is because we're doing this twice, and we're going to need to modify that, to be sure. Because a lot of it is just that the world hexes need to know a lot of things. So we're probably going to end up modifying the get world hex inclusion. Maybe like storing the biome hex map mode inclusion in some way in like the hex store. That might be what we end up doing, in fact. Yeah, I don't know. At any rate, I want to test this again. It seems like I didn't fix it. That seems like that was probably a fluke. So let's go ahead and try this once more. Is it only when we enter the coverage map mode first? Create a route here. Coverage map mode. Okay, So it seems to work if we do it that way. What if we enter the coverage map mode first and then create the route in coverage map mode? So we'll need to purchase the land, create route. It's just working. I mean, it's super laggy, but it's working. That's very strange. Oh, I know why it's working. It's working because there aren't things that exist. Like, the virtual hexes don't exist inside of the water hexes, and because we are continuing when we encounter a water hex, this fixed it. I gotcha. Okay, that's the problem, and that's also the reason why it was only working on the first row until it ran into a water hex. Okay, so we got that fixed. Now we just need to be optimizing this get world hex map mode inclusion. So that, I think, is something for the next episode. Subscribe for more, and I will see you all next time.